Imagine a palace so vast it had its own laws of love, a place where silk whispered secrets, eunuchs managed intimacy, and one misplaced slipper could end your career. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was the Ottoman Imperial Harem, a world as seductive as it was terrifying. Behind those gilded lattice screens lived hundreds of women, all competing for one man's attention. But attention came with rules. And those rules? Well, let's just say some of them were weirder than anything your ex ever tried. From the silent nights of mandatory moan control to mirror dances and retirement by childbirth, this is not just history. It's history with eyeliner, espionage, and a side of fig pudding. So prepare to have your illusions shattered, your eyebrows raised, and your curiosity completely indulged. Welcome to the 10 strangest bedroom rules of the Ottoman Imperial Harem. If you love strange royal history as much as we do, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more wild historical truths, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's dive in. The Ottoman Imperial Harem, a place of silken dreams, whispered ambition, and deodorant anxiety. You see, if you thought modern dating was stressful, try being a 16th century concubine whose very survival depended on how her armpits smelled. In the Ottoman harem, it wasn't enough to be beautiful. You had to be fragrant. And I don't mean a light mist of citrusy perfume. I mean full-blown spice market meets heaven olfactory warfare. The rule was clear, though never written down in any law book. No smell, no service. If you smelled bad, you weren't getting near the Sultan. End of story. You'd be back to folding silk sheets with the junior concubines, crying into your rosewater tea. Let's talk hygiene. These women bathed daily, sometimes twice, scrubbed in the famous palace hammams with attendants who would exfoliate every inch of their skin like their lives depended on it. Because they kind of did. The bath ritual was a performance. Enter steaming marble chamber, disrobe like a Venetian goddess, emerge glistening and non-threatening to the Valid Sultan, who was often watching from her gold-inlaid balcony while pretending to sip mint tea. After bathing came the oils: ambergris, musk, civet, and my personal favorite, essence of pressed jasmine petals, massaged directly into the elbows. Yes, even the elbows had to smell seductive. If your elbows didn't glisten like honeyed apricots, were you even trying? But it gets better. There was a whole department of the harem responsible for fragrance training. Some girls, often slaves taken from conquered lands, arrived never having seen a lemon, let alone a vial of imported Iranian rose oil. They had to be taught. And then came the armpit test. Once a concubine was considered bedchamber ready, she would undergo a private inspection, which, according to palace legend, often involved a sniff. By whom? That's unclear. Possibly a senior eunuch, possibly the Valida herself, possibly a test room that released a dervish-level incense gust. But the rule remained. If you smelled like onions, you were done. Some ambitious concubines took it further. They'd infuse their breath with clove and cardamom, soak their underthings in lavender water, and even sleep with rose petals tucked behind their ears. One girl allegedly made herself faint by overloading her décolletage with so much musk that the Sultan sneezed and left before the second kiss. And yet, despite all this preparation, you weren't even guaranteed a night with the Sultan. You were just added to the potential fragrance rotation. You could go years smelling like a walking orchard and still never be chosen. But God forbid you got lazy, because the second you let your scent slide, you were reassigned to candle-making duty. And let me assure you, palace candles did not smell of ambergris. Let's not forget, in an era with no modern soap, no deodorant, and no showers, the Ottomans were remarkably obsessed with smell. And who can blame them? The Sultan had 100 women to choose from. If you're going to differentiate, you might as well start with whoever smells like fresh orange blossom and not week-old goat. So next time you worry about body spray before a date, remember, You're not competing in a 16th century Ottoman sent-off, judged by eunuchs and sultanas. In the Imperial Harem, scent wasn't just seduction, it was survival. So, you've bathed in Bulgarian rose oil, your armpits smell like poetic sorbet, and your eyebrows arch like the Bosphorus Bridge. You're ready, right? Ready to catch the eye of the world's most powerful man? Not so fast. Because before you ever reached the Sultan's luxurious bedchamber, you had to pass a far more intimidating gatekeeper, the Chief Black Eunuch. This was no ordinary palace bureaucrat. No, no. The Chief Unuk was the single most powerful man in the harem, a castrated guardian with the authority of a prime minister, the sneakiness of a court spy. You might think the Sultan ran the show, but inside the harem the eunuch's nod meant yes, and his frown meant, congratulations, you'll be spinning silk until your bones fossilize. Here's how it worked. The Sultan didn't just pick women willy-nilly. Contrary to popular fantasy, he wasn't frolicking around the harem in a silk robe, pulling girls like tulips from a basket. No, he sent word. And when he sent word, the chief eunuch curated the selection. That's right, a man with no interest in women decided which woman the Sultan would see naked. He would inspect you, not sexually, but politically. Were you ambitious? Were you already forming alliances? Did the Valid Sultan approve of you? Did you giggle too much? Did you forget to greet him with the proper 14-syllable title like Noble Watcher of the Veil and Moon-Blessed Servant of His Imperial Whim? Fail any of these, and your name didn't go into the crystal slipper selection. In fact, if you rubbed the eunuch the wrong way, your name might mysteriously vanish from the records. Poof. No promotion, no scented bedchamber, just a long career refilling the lemon bowl. Now here's where it gets even more bizarre. If you made it into the Sultan's shortlist, the chief eunuch escorted you personally, sometimes with a candlelit procession of silent maids, sometimes alone, depending on the ritual of the era. He'd knock once on the Sultan's door, announce your name like a headlining act at a royal burlesque, and gently nudge you forward. Awkward? Oh, completely. Imagine being walked into your boss's bedroom by your HR director, who bows, recites your resume, and then quietly closes the door behind you with the expression of a man about to file paperwork. And yet, the eunuch's power didn't end there. He was the Sultan's eyes and ears inside the harem. He reported back on whisperings, jealousy, illness, political scheming, and who cried the loudest when they weren't chosen for Tuesday night rotation. He could raise a concubine's status with a word. He could also destroy her reputation with a well-placed comment like, "She tripped over a carpet while bowing." You didn't flirt with the chief eunuch, but you certainly flattered him. Some concubines would spend years perfecting the art of subtle gift-giving. A perfectly embroidered handkerchief, a bottle of rare Egyptian perfume, a poem in Ottoman Turkish where every third word suspiciously rhymed with his name. And it worked. The smart girls understood. To reach the Sultan's bedroom, you had to pass through a wall of silk, incense, scheming women, and one unimpressed eunuch with a clipboard. So remember, the next time someone tells you gatekeeping is toxic, point them to the 16th century Ottoman harem. There, it was quite literally the job description. The scent is divine. The eunuch approved. The bed is fluffed with peacock feathers and perfumed with ambergris. You've just been escorted into the Sultan's private chamber, draped in silks that cost more than your entire village. Now you have one job. No, not to please the Sultan, not even to entertain him with charming conversation about 16th century architecture or the poetry of Rumi. Your job? Get pregnant, tonight. Because in the Ottoman harem, there was a strange, nerve-shattering rule. A concubine could only sleep with the Sultan once, unless she conceived. Yes, you heard that correctly. Your first night with His Imperial Majesty might also be your last, unless your womb delivered a bonus round. Forget romance. Forget candlelit build-up. This was not so much a seduction as a one-night-only fertility exam. Now imagine the pressure. You're lying beside the most powerful man in the empire, possibly the world, and you're not just trying to be remembered, you're trying to become the mother of his child. No stress, right? If you succeeded, you were instantly elevated to Haseki Sultan, the Sultan's official consort and baby mama. You got your own apartments, your own servants, your own cooks. You were now a legitimate contender for power, prestige, and imperial influence. You could even boss around women who had been in the harem longer than you'd been alive. But if you failed, well, back to the waiting room, sweetheart. You'd be removed from the rotation. The Sultan might remember your name fondly, or he might not. Your silk robe would be swapped for a cotton one, and you'd likely spend the rest of your days doing embroidery, sighing dramatically over fountains, and starting passive-aggressive rumors about the concubine who did get pregnant. Some women tried everything to secure their future. They would eat fertility-boosting foods the night before, walnuts, honey, dates soaked in goat's milk. They'd pray. Some had secret herbal remedies smuggled in from their homelands. One concubine supposedly tied pomegranate seeds into her hair as a good luck charm. Another whispered an ancient Slavic chant into the Sultan's ear, before fainting from sheer terror. And don't think the Sultan had it easy either. He had to perform under pressure, knowing that any slip-up in royal virility would become the harem's hottest gossip by breakfast. Did you hear? The Sultan sneezed and missed. Even weirder, the rule wasn't about cruelty, it was a population control policy. With hundreds of women in the harem, and a palace budget that was already blowing through rose oil like a teenage girl with a Sephora card, they had to limit who got access to real power. The concubine system wasn't just about sex. It was a ladder, a meritocracy, a deadly game of scented thrones. If you got pregnant, you leveled up. If you didn't, no second chances. Unless, of course, the Sultan really liked your personality, which, let's be honest, was rare. So, next time you think your Tinder date didn't go well, remember, at least your reproductive future wasn't riding on it. In the Ottoman harem, one night meant one shot. And for many, that shot determined everything, from power to privilege to the number of embroidered towels you were allowed. You might think that earning a night with the Sultan was a simple matter of beauty, charm, or maybe a whisper of political favor. But no, dear listener, that would be far too rational. Instead, in the glittering halls of the Ottoman Imperial Harem, there was a peculiar custom practiced during certain reigns, particularly among the more artistically inclined sultans, known informally and very unhelpfully as the mirror dance. What was the mirror dance, you ask? Oh, just a seductive performance where half-naked concubines crawled, twirled, and posed dramatically on the floor with polished brass mirrors, all while trying to catch the Sultan's eye without accidentally flashing the Valid Sultan seated 3 cushions away. According to palace lore, the Sultan would sit on a cushion atop a raised platform, shrouded in veils, or behind a mashrabiyah screen, observing the girls as they moved like poetic pythons across the tiled floor. Each woman was given a small mirror, a length of silk, and sometimes a mandolin player if she'd bribed the musicians well. The goal? Display grace, balance, flexibility, modesty, and seduction, all at once. You had to glide like a swan, pose like a Persian miniature, and twinkle like a chandelier. But never overdo it. Heaven forbid you looked like you were trying. Some of the rules included: you couldn't look directly at the Sultan. That was considered presumptuous. You had to keep your mirror angled at your face, not at his. This wasn't a selfie session after all. If you dropped your mirror, well, disqualified. That mirror cost more than your hometown. Of course, some women trained for years. They'd practice their routines in secret, choreographing their mirror moments to catch the lamplight just so. A well-timed eyebrow raised through the reflection was considered an advanced move, second only to the extremely dangerous mirror kiss, where the concubine appeared to blow a kiss into the glass and tilt it toward the Sultan's screen. Risky. Some girls nailed it. Others got sent to the towel-folding committee for life. Then there were the accidents. One girl spun too fast, sent her mirror flying, and cracked the Sultan's favorite lamp. She was reassigned to fish-feeding duty. Another tried to balance the mirror on her forehead. Clever, yes, but sneezed halfway through and had to be carried out on a silk rug. But perhaps the most infamous tale is of Layla of Trebizond, a concubine known for her dramatic flair and zero sense of proportion. During her mirror dance, she incorporated a dove, a cloud of cinnamon powder, and a silk scarf, so long it wrapped around another dancer mid-performance. The Sultan reportedly laughed so hard he choked on his sherbet. Layla wasn't chosen that night, but she was promoted to official storyteller of the Valid Sultan, which frankly was a bigger win. Now, not all sultans loved the mirror dance. Some preferred chess, others preferred poetry recitations or mysterious eye contact behind a lattice screen. But when the mirror dance was in play, it was essentially a bedroom audition disguised as interpretive floor art. And if you think modern talent shows are cutthroat, just remember, losing this one meant you never saw a scented cushion again. So next time you stumble while dancing in heels, just be grateful no sultan is watching from behind a curtain, judging your mirror angles and contemplating your reproductive potential. Imagine this. You wake up in a palace of 1,000 women. Your braid has just been polished to perfection, your hands smell of orange blossom water, and your heart is racing. Why? Because sometime in the night, a eunuch may have tiptoed past your velvet curtain and turned your slippers. In the Ottoman Imperial Harem, those dainty little shoes at the edge of your sleeping cushion weren't just footwear, they were coded messages, silk-soled telegrams, and if the right pair got flipped in the right direction, your entire life was about to change. Here's how it worked. Before a concubine was summoned to the Sultan's bed, she would be discreetly notified, not with a letter or a messenger or even a whisper, but with a change in her slipper position. If your slippers, which always rested neatly at the foot of your bed, were suddenly found turned inward, it meant, "Tonight's the night, darling. The Sultan desires your presence." If they weren't touched, business as usual. Another day of tea, gossip, and possibly learning how to braid tassels with your elbows for no reason. Now, if your slippers were turned outward, facing away from the bed, that was often interpreted as a polite rejection. A gentle, padded-footed "not tonight." Some even took it as a political message. You've been seen, but not selected. But if your slippers went missing entirely, well, best start packing. That usually meant you'd been removed from the Sultan's radar entirely. Or worse, reassigned to the old palace where all the retired women went to live out their days with cats, carpets, and bitter conversations. The funny thing, no one ever saw the slippers being moved. The process was shrouded in mystery, like a ghostly fashion ritual. The eunuchs were trained to move silently. They came at odd hours, midnight, sometimes later, and if you happened to wake up mid-shuffle, you had to pretend you didn't. That was the rule. To acknowledge the slipper adjustment was to risk losing your spot to someone with better acting skills. One story tells of a concubine who, upon discovering her slippers turned inward, burst into joyful song. Big mistake. She was overheard, scolded for breaking protocol, and denied her royal night. Her slippers were turned back. She reportedly spent the rest of her life muttering to her shoes. But wait, it gets better. There were fake slipper conspiracies. Yes, sabotage. Some concubines allegedly tried turning their own slippers, hoping to sneak into the Sultan's chambers and claim confused eunuch as a defense. But palace guards were wise to this and began marking slipper soles with ink stamps and on particularly suspicious nights, tracing eunuch footprints in the marble dust. One particularly devious concubine Esma of Bosnia, once hired a junior maid to accidentally move another girl's slippers. The maid got caught. Esma got demoted. The maid got reassigned to feeding the Sultan's parrots, who then became fluent in several passive-aggressive phrases. In the grand scheme of palace politics, these slippers weren't just footwear. They were a system of power, favor, and intrigue. So while your average concubine might smile sweetly by day, at night she slept with one eye on her shoes. Because in the Ottoman harem, you could lose everything, not by a scandal, not by a war, not by a jealous rival, but by a pair of slippers that pointed the wrong way. Now brace yourself, because we're diving into one of the more baffling and frankly contradictory rules of the Ottoman Imperial Harem, a place where logic often took a backseat to decorum, superstition, and the deeply mysterious whims of royal taste. The rule went something like this: all concubines must be virgins, but not too young, and definitely not look too young, but still youthful, yet mature, but only in the right lighting. Clear? No? Excellent. Welcome to harem logic. Let's start with the obvious. Yes, virginity was a non-negotiable. The Ottoman sultans, like most monarchs of the era, wanted their concubines untouched, pure, and unsullied by other men's moustaches, as the court poet once put it, probably while sobbing into a rose. Virginity wasn't just about sexuality. It was about political control, lineage legitimacy, and most importantly, ego. But here's where things got weird. You couldn't be too young. No one wanted a girl who looked like she'd just finished her multiplication tables. The Sultan was no fool. He wanted maturity, grace, emotional awareness, and, of course, the ability to hold a conversation that didn't involve ponies. So what was the sweet spot? Somewhere between 15 and 20, depending on the Sultan's preferences, the current Valid Sultan's mood, and whether Mercury was in retrograde. Concubines were often selected as children, trained for years in music, language, manners, and eyebrow control, and then presented at the magical age of barely legal but convincingly womanly. Their bodies were monitored like sacred pomegranates, not too ripe, not too green. There was even a phrase in the palace: she must walk like a doe, not a duck, which frankly is a lot of pressure for someone trying to learn Ottoman Turkish, outplaying and which fork is for sherbet. Here's the cruel irony. If you look too young, the Sultan might find it distasteful. If you looked too mature, he might assume you were lying about your purity. So what did the clever girls do? They learned to act their age, not their real age, their calculated harem age. This was a performance art. Some girls practiced wide-eyed innocence in the mirror. Others whispered their favorite childhood memories to parrots in case the Sultan asked, and some strategically applied powders to blur their age like a 16th century Snapchat filter. And yes, there were inspections. Private, quiet, awkward inspections. No one really talks about who performed these checks or how scientifically rigorous they were. But it was enough to cause weekly waves of anxiety among concubines who maybe tripped too flirtatiously on the stairs. There were also rumors. Did you hear? Julia was sent away because she had laugh lines. Or worse, Isel smiled too confidently. She must have kissed a man. These judgments could be brutal and instant. Even more absurd, some concubines pretended to be younger if they were too close to retirement age, which shockingly was around 24. They'd squeak when they laughed. They'd giggle at jokes that weren't funny. One reportedly faked a fear of thunderstorms just to seem more girlish. But it wasn't just the women under scrutiny. The Sultan's preferences dictated everything. Sultan Murad IV preferred modest moon-faced girls with eyebrows that met. Meanwhile, Sultan Ibrahim the Mad reportedly demanded girls with melon-shaped hips and refused any who looked too intelligent. That's not a joke. That's documented. So the perfect concubine had to be a virgin. Not too young, not too old, not too clever, not too silly. just mysterious enough to make the Sultan curious, but not suspicious. In other words, she had to be an age-defying, personality-balanced enigma in silk slippers. So next time you struggle to pick a filter for your dating profile, remember, at least you're not being judged by eunuchs, astrologers, and a sultan who once rejected a girl for being too symmetrical. If you were lucky or politically blessed enough to be invited into the sultan's sacred bedchamber, there was one rule you had to obey with more diligence than any perfume ritual or etiquette code. Do not make a sound. Yes. The rule was absolute. Silence in the bedroom, no moaning, no gasping, no pillow squawking, not even the gentle hum of, "This is going rather well, thank you." You were expected to make love like a noble ghost, graceful, mysterious, and eerily quiet. Now, why such a peculiar rule? Well, for starters, the Ottoman court prized modesty, even in the boudoir. The Sultan might enjoy pleasures of the flesh, but he didn't want to hear them echoing down the marble corridors like some erotic call to prayer. Dignity had to be maintained. This wasn't a Roman orgy, it was a royal procedure, wrapped in silence and scented linen. The walls of Topkapi were thin, and the servants were many. Gossip moved faster than plague rats. If a concubine let out a delighted yelp, you could bet your final jasmine-soaked handkerchief that half the kitchen staff would be reenacting it over soup by sunrise. Even more dangerous? If your vocal enthusiasm suggested too much experience, it could backfire dramatically. The Sultan might wonder, why does this woman sound like she's hosting a festival? Who taught her that trick? Was it a stable boy? A Venetian ambassador? Whispers of impropriety were deadly in the harem, so even if you were in the throes of royal bliss, you had to sound like a sleeping statue. A concubine with feelings was fine. A concubine with volume, suspicious. Some sultans were especially particular. Sultan Selim II, known as Selim the Sot, allegedly kept a fan running during his nightly appointments just to drown out potential emotional leakage. Others preferred to have a lute player softly plucking in the corner, so any stray gasp might be mistaken for an especially dramatic chord. To cope with this rule, concubines trained themselves. They practiced breathing techniques in the bathhouse, bit their silk sleeves during rehearsals, and even stuffed rose petals in their mouths during moments of passion. One particularly creative girl held a silver spoon between her teeth. Don't ask how that ended. Then there was the added complication of furniture. Ottoman beds weren't designed for soundproofing. No memory foam, no squeak-free slats. One creaky bedpost could ruin your reputation. Concubines learned to distribute weight artfully, using their toes, hips, and divine patience. They would memorize the weak spots of the bed like battle maps. And the pressure? Immense. You had one chance to impress the Sultan while staying absolutely silent. It was like being asked to win a ballroom dancing competition while standing completely still. Of course, some women forgot themselves. One concubine, known only as the Nightingale of Damascus, was reportedly so enthusiastic during her royal summons that she could be heard 3 courtyards away. Her fate? Exiled to a distant tower, where she allegedly became a nighttime storyteller and told very quiet tales. So yes, silent nights weren't just for winter holidays. In the Ottoman harem, they were an occupational requirement. Because if you made a sound in the Sultan's bed, you weren't just being expressive, you were being politically reckless. Ah, love, that fluttery, swoon-worthy, poetry in the hallways kind of love. Forbidden, completely forbidden. Unless, of course, he fell in love with you first. Because in the Ottoman Imperial Harem, where the Sultan was the center of gravity and the concubines orbited like exquisitely perfumed moons, the rule was simple, yet hilariously cruel. Never fall in love with the Sultan, unless the Sultan falls in love with you first. In which case, please fall deeply, beautifully, and unconditionally. Let's unpack this emotionally hazardous rule, shall we? To begin with, the harem wasn't designed for romance. It was designed for dynastic utility and controlled desire, wrapped in silk and scented intrigue. Concubines were expected to be loyal, obedient, pleasing, but emotionally neutral, like a well-trained harp or a flattering shadow. They were brought in young, trained in etiquette, music, poetry, and how to look longingly at the horizon without appearing needy. If they showed affection too early, or worse, clung, they were considered dangerous. Falling in love with the Sultan was risky because it implied ambition. It suggested you wanted more than just your night of glory. You wanted him, his heart, his attention, maybe even his crown-adjacent influence. And let's not forget, the Valid Sultan, the Sultan's mother, hated that. She didn't like anyone getting too close to her son. After all, she ruled the harem, and if some lovelorn Georgian beauty thought she could cry her way into political relevance, oh no, off you go to the quiet garden suite with no windows. Some concubines were exiled for writing poems, others for slipping love notes. One famously carved the Sultan's name into her bath basin with a pearl hairpin. Romantic? Yes. She was promptly relocated to the candle wax department. But then, there was the other side of the coin. If the Sultan fell for you? Oh, darling, then the rules flipped entirely. Suddenly your soft sighs were enchanting. Your letters were delicate expressions of the heart. Your forehead was kissed in public. You received golden slippers and private gardens, and a dedicated eunuch just for melon slicing. Now it was your duty to fall in love, and fall in love beautifully, elegantly, preferably while composing tragic verses about tulips and longing. To not fall in love at that point would be suspicious. What kind of woman denies the Sultan her heart? Was she scheming? Was she already in love with someone else? It was emotional whiplash, wrapped in silk. So concubines became master actresses. Many walked the tightrope of just the right amount of affection. You had to appear smitten but not obsessed. Affectionate but never clingy. Passionate but always with a fallback plan, just in case he replaced you with someone younger, quieter, or with better lute skills. The most famous exception? Hürrem Sultan, formerly Roxelana, who dared to love Sultan Suleiman openly, fiercely, and permanently. And she won. She became his legal wife, broke centuries of tradition, and wielded political power like a rose-scented dagger. But she was the exception that proved the rule, and made every other concubine mutter her again under their breath. So, to survive emotionally in the harem, you had to be a romantic contortionist. Show affection, but only when prompted. Withhold desire, unless requested. Love him, but only if he loves you first. And don't ever, ever let your eyes linger too long during the fruit tray delivery. Because in this palace, unsanctioned feelings weren't just embarrassing. They were political liabilities. So far, we've learned that to survive the Ottoman Imperial Harem, you had to smell like paradise, walk like poetry, and love like a professional actress in a silent opera. Now, let's talk about the ultimate goal of every concubine. Get pregnant, have a prince, secure your future. Simple, right? Oh, you sweet, innocent fool. Because in the Ottoman harem, the rule wasn't just get pregnant. It was don't get pregnant too early, or too eagerly, or before the Valid Sultan says it's okay. Pregnancy, you see, was the nuclear weapon of harem politics. One royal fetus could catapult you from foot-massaging nobody to Haseki Sultan, wielding actual influence in matters of state. You'd go from serving dates to receiving diamonds, but if you conceived at the wrong time or without the proper emotional clearance, it was seen as an act of treason against the Valid Sultan and sometimes even against the empire. Let's break this down. Once the Sultan took a liking to you, your job wasn't just to get lucky. It was to read the room and the politics. Was another woman already pregnant? Was the Valide grooming her to become Haseki? Did your sudden baby bump threaten the balance of power? Did your due date overlap with a solar eclipse? These things mattered. In fact, it was widely understood that no concubine should accidentally get pregnant without the Valid Sultan's blessing. And that's not just metaphorical. The Valid often had her own spies monitoring things like who was skipping lemon water and replacing it with fertility tonics, who suddenly stopped dancing at court events because their ankles were swollen, who kept rubbing their lower abdomen while pretending it was a bellyache. Pregnancy without permission was a declaration of ambition. And ambition could get you reassigned to goatskin scroll restoration. One poor girl, Nigar of Skopje, reportedly became pregnant after her second night with the Sultan. Instead of congratulations, she received a sudden transfer to the old palace with a vague note, "Too forward." Her son? Shipped off to live in provincial obscurity, raised by wet nurses and wistful eunuchs. On the flip side, timing it just right could unlock the harem's treasure chest. Once you had the Sultan's child, a son, ideally, you became Haseki Sultan with your own quarters, staff, jewels, and pension plan. Your enemies had to bow. Even the Valide Sultan might warm to you, especially if her arthritis was acting up and she needed a new favorite to do the scheming. The trick was appearing grateful, not greedy. Clever concubines would feign shock at their own pregnancy. Me? Oh heavens, I thought it was just too many dates and almond pastries. They'd weep, pray, and dedicate the child's birth to the empire, to Allah, to the Sultan, to the Sultan's mustache, whatever it took. The biggest irony? The Sultan wanted sons. That was the point of the harem. But heaven forbid, you looked like you wanted it too much. So, here was the paradox. Don't get pregnant before he's obsessed with you. Don't wait so long that he gets distracted by someone else's hips. And definitely don't conceive if the Valid Sultan still prefers your rival's lute playing. In short, you had to play reproductive roulette with silk veils, scented oils, and zero contraception, and still win. So next time you hear someone say, "Women back then had it easy," remind them that in the Ottoman harem, even your uterus had to be politically strategic. Congratulations, you did it. You bathed in jasmine, you performed your mirror dance without chipping a tooth, you fell in love, just the right amount, and, miracle of miracles, you got pregnant at the right time. Your prize, your very own title, private quarters, jewels, influence, and, oh yes, permanent retirement from the Sultan's bedroom. Yes, dear listener, welcome to the strange final chapter of the Ottoman harem's twisted rulebook. Once you've given the Sultan a child, especially a male heir, you are officially done in the bedroom. For life. That's right. The reward for successfully producing an imperial prince was not more affection, or more nights of passion, or even a second round of pillow talk. No, your thank you gift was a firm ceremonial retirement. You were elevated to celibacy. This rule had both practical and political logic. Sort of. See, once you were the mother of a prince, your role changed completely. You weren't a concubine anymore. You were now a sacred vessel, a respected figure, a woman of destiny. You had to devote yourself entirely to raising the Sultan's child, overseeing his education, protecting him from scheming rivals, and occasionally sewing his name into tiny pillowcases. To continue sleeping with the Sultan after giving birth to a son? That would blur boundaries. It would look like favoritism, or worse, emotional involvement. Can't have that. Not in a system that thrives on order, detachment, and heavily perfumed emotional suppression. And frankly, you were now too powerful to be seen as just a concubine. You were the Valide Sultan in waiting, the matriarch to be, the womb that could give the empire its next ruler. You weren't meant to seduce anymore. You were meant to supervise, and oh, supervise you did. You got your own staff, your own apartments, your own tea schedule. You spent your days inspecting the fruit trays, eavesdropping from behind curtains, whispering advice to junior concubines like an ancient scented oracle, and of course embroidering passive-aggressive messages into linens. May her mirror crack was a popular one. The young girls feared you. The Valid Sultan watched you. The eunuchs bowed lower. Your rivals seethed in silence, especially if they were still stuck doing mirror routines at 30. But of course, you had to keep up appearances. You couldn't be seen mourning your sexual retirement, even if you missed the Sultan's slightly crooked smile or the way he pronounced your name with a hiccup. But you were dignified now, a robe-wearing queen of restraint. Still, some retired concubines got bored. A few tried to sneak in for just one more night. They'd put on their best perfume, lean on old memories, and hope the Sultan remembered that one time with the fig pudding. But protocol always prevailed. The guards knew, the Validin knew, the eunuchs definitely knew. One infamous mother of a prince reportedly tried to seduce the Sultan disguised as a new concubine. She wore a veil, changed her voice, and almost made it through the door, until she sneezed, and the Sultan recognized it. She was immediately sent back to her room with a stern fruit basket. And so, the rule stood firm: give a son, retire the fun. Of course, there were exceptions. One or two sultans ignored tradition and kept their favorites close. But for the most part, the system required rotation, mystery, and the constant renewal of the sultan's interest. Once you'd produced a prince, you weren't a lover anymore. You were a guardian of dynasty, a minder of fate, and a woman who could shut down gossip with a single look over her porcelain teacup. You'd made it, not to love, not to romance, but to power. And so ends the tale of the 10 strangest bedroom rules of the Ottoman Imperial Harem. A world of whispers, rules, seduction, scented slippers, and terrifying eunuchs with opinions about perfume. Where love was political, pregnancy was a gamble, and retirement came not with a pension, but with embroidery needles and an aggressively guarded tea tray.